Okay, right now we are going to learn how to do some effects in Photoshop with the bevel and emboss tool. So we will be doing things like this, how to create emboss, deboss kind of effects on paper, different levels of it, just to do like a simple emboss on paper. Maybe doing some effects on wood with this tool, other materials like leather, how you can get, really pick up the quality of that material. And then eventually we will do something simple like a glass embellishment or detail, and how to do something like that. And if we get to it, I will re-explore channel mixer a little bit and how to change um, textures to different colors, something starting like this image and then maybe getting to something like that. um, or starting from something like this and getting to something like that. So just ways to use color in an unexpected way, using the channel mixer. And then just simple things like turning a bottle color, or liquid color, or any color of anything really, but in this case liquid color in a whiskey bottle to something different. Okay, so we're going to start by actually opening Illustrator and opening this artwork labels .ai file. So I'm just going to open that in Illustrator, and then I am going to simultaneously open up one of these textures in Photoshop. I'm actually going to start with this leather texture because I think it has enough detail so that we can explore that bevel emboss tool, but also pick up the colors, or pick up the texture rather, changing colors. And I will do that with channel mixer as well, so that will be kind of a quick little bonus to learning this bevel emboss tool. So I'm going to open that up in Photoshop, and I'm going to go back to my Illustrator. And for those of you that don't know, you can easily switch in between applications you're working with by holding Command and hitting the Tab button. And I still have Command held down, so you can see it pops up this menu, and I can just mouse over whichever application I want to go to. And if you're between two, like I'm working between Photoshop and Illustrator, if I quickly just hit Command Tab, it will switch to the other one. Command Tab, it'll switch back. So I am going to select one of these graphics. Now I've just added a couple of these. These are just stock vectors that we're going to use today. So first I want to select all these graphics inside, but not this external part. And right now they're grouped, so I kind of just select this whole item, and you can see it selects everything. But I'm going to use my direct select tool, which is this white arrow. Quick key is A to get there. I was in the move tool, which is the black arrow or the selection tool, and that quick key is V. So again, just switching over to A. And I want to deselect it, so I'm going to hold down the Option button and the Shift button. And you can see I've deselected that back area. And now when I move this, it moves freely. But actually I lost another piece to it too, so I'm going to make sure that I have all this selected and deselect that back area. So now again I have what I need here, and I'm going to just copy that, Command C, and go back to Photoshop, and I'm going to paste that, Command V. And again, like the last tutorial, this is going to pop up this smart object, or this paste dialog box, and the top option is smart object. I'm going to hit OK. There's other options in here, but what I want is a smart object because, as I mentioned several times, we're trying to do non-destructive editing. So I'm just going to hit OK. And it will pop this in here. probably make it a little smaller. Again, you can click and drag these values up at the top here as sliders. You know, when you're placing something from Illustrator into Photoshop, you know, it basically drops it in with the transform tools active, so you can resize it, and you can even just, you know, size it using the handles like normal. Hit return or enter, and that will apply the transform. Now again, this is because this is a smart object, you do not lose any of this image quality if you do go to change it again. So even, you know, if I make it really small and I decide, well, I want it bigger again, you can always enlarge it, and you can see none of that image quality is lost. That's one of the benefits, one of the many benefits of keeping things smart objects. So I am going to apply that again, and now I'm going to introduce the bevel and emboss effect. So when you're doing this effect in Photoshop, you will take the layer, and that will kind of work as the template of the area that you want to affect this, you know, put this effect around. But because for an emboss, you know, in this particular instance, I can just go down to the effect and click on it and do it, which is this bevel and emboss option here, down this little FX menu at the bottom of your layers palette. And I can click on bevel and emboss, and it will start adding it. But I actually want to start with kind of a blind emboss, so I can see how that is actually picking up the details of the texture behind it. So before I go to this, I'm actually going to take the fill, and I'm going to make it 0. Now I can, again, this is another value here. You can see when I roll over it, there's that little hand with the 2 arrows on the left and right. And if I click and drag it, it becomes a slider, and I can take that fill down to 0. You can see the object is still there, but, you know, again, with a fill of 0, you won't see it. But the beauty of this is, even though we have a fill of 0, we can introduce effects to it, and those effects will still apply. You just won't see the original object. So I'm going to do that really quickly just to show you what I mean. So I'm going to go back down to this FX, bevel emboss, and right now it's very subtle, but I'm just going to pump up some of these values here so you can, you know, see what's happening here. So playing around with some of these things, the size is like the size of the effect. You can see when I drag this slider up, it becomes more, you know, apparent what that effect is. And, you know, right now I'm just working on inner bevel. You know, there's different styles you can work with, emboss, you know, outer bevel. So there's all these different things, and we'll play around with those. But again, just so you can see, I have this effect happening even though I have a 0 fill on here. And I'm just going to hit OK. We're going to come back to this. But just to show you that if I put my fill, you have to make sure that the fill is the one at 0 and not the opacity. So the fill, if I put that back to 100 and I put the opacity at 0, you're going to see that the graphic will disappear the same as when the fill is on 0, but also with the graphic, the effect will not be showing. So when I put this opacity at 0, it will get rid of the color, but it's also going to get rid of the effect. So that's why we keep the opacity at 100 and the fill at 0. So, okay, so now, you know, again, I'm going to go and I'm going to go back into my bevel emboss. So I'm, you know, I have this, only this one smart object above a background right now, just 2 layers in the file. So when you have a smart object, or really when you're using this effect at all, it is a non-destructive edit. So you can see it added this sub layer that says effects, and the bevel emboss is there. So I can click on this again, and when I click on it, it will relaunch that same dialog box that I had in the first place. And if you're trying to keep your file more organized, once you're done with what you're doing on these working layers, you can click this little arrow all the way to the right, right next to this FX graphic here, and when you click on that, it's just going to hide these. And again, if you're working with a lot of layers, you know, sometimes it just makes sense to hide them, so it's easy to navigate to the layers you want to find. And as always, it doesn't hurt to name the layers, so we could just name this, you know, graphic 1. But I will reveal that effects sublayer, and I'm going to click on bevel and emboss, double click on it rather, and it will launch this window again. And let me just move this over so we can see what we're doing here. Now, to get that effect of that like kind of leather, like stamped leather, or like a logo stamped on leather, maybe it's even screen printed and debossed, you kind of have to pay attention to the angle of the lighting. So right now, when again, I just played around with a couple of these things, and I put outer bevel, and I just moved the depth up and the size up and this highlight up, just so we can see that there is some kind of effect going on here. But now I'm gonna go and I'm gonna change it up a little bit so that it looks more like that reference, where it looks like more debossed from that leather rather than this emboss. So I can still use outer bevel, but I'm going to go and see what emboss does for me first. So again, all of this is kind of trial and error and playing around with it till you get the levels that you like. So, and also I urge you to play around with this so you kind of feel more comfortable with what things to control. So I'm going to first start up again at the very top. The first item I could change is the style. And when I first came into this set of tools, it defaulted to inner bevel, but sometimes it just defaults to the last one that you use. So I'm going to try emboss, and it's very similar actually, but again, because of where the light is coming from, it feels like this is kind of raised rather than debossed from that surface. So actually, when I'm talking about this lighting here, this is basically the angle of the light. So wherever this little dot inside this circle is, that's where the light is coming from. So you can see it's kind of coming from this top direction up here and kind of going down, and that's the direction that's in. So you look at this little circle preview, and wherever you move that light, that's kind of the direction the light's going to come from. So if I moved it down to this like bottom right quadrant of this circle, then the light is going to be coming from this way, and those highlights will be on the opposite edges and the shadows will be on the opposite edges. So I'm just going to do that now so you can see. And once I did that, it automatically changed it to, instead of looking like it's popping out, to looking like it's kind of going in. And I think anywhere I drag along this bottom half will still have that look, even if I drag it kind of towards the center of the bottom, it still has that kind of look where it's kind of pushed in. So, and I'm going to adjust these highlights a little bit now because I did that just to kind of ridicule the point. I'm going to take them down a little bit. And we can always come back and adjust these after we add that color. So, again, things I'm playing with now are the highlight here. This slider will, basically control the level of white in your highlight. So if I put it all the way to 100, it's going to go, pretty much as bright as it can go. And the more I drag it to the left, the more the percentage goes down, it will take that away. And, again, this is all trial and error. It's all just kind of getting the levels of these things that you like visually, that you prefer, whatever your aesthetic is. Sometimes you want something really shiny and hot, so maybe you drag it all the way to the right. And sometimes maybe you don't want it lit so well, so it's a little more subtle. And again, the same way the highlight things work here, the darker bits in here, it's harder to see because this is a black background, but these darker bits, if I drag them, you can see those getting darker. And now these are pretty much the same as the same way blending modes work. So I can change these, linear burn and multiply are two blending modes that work really well for picking up the background texture behind something. So those are pretty good for now, but obviously you can have all these other ones, and they create all different effects. But for the purpose that we're working with now, linear burn and multiply, they're both pretty good. So you have like this true sense of like a shadow edge and a true sense of like a highlight edge. So choose one of those. And again, I'm just going to move this lighting angle around a little bit just to make it so it's not centered. And again, it kind of looks like it's this blind, like debossed effect now. So I think that's pretty good for now. And again, all I've really played with here is the lighting angle, the opacity of the highlight and the shadow, and the style. Now, again, you can toy with some of these other tools. The size will basically make the edge of this like emboss or deboss like thicker or smaller, and you get to a certain point where it actually looks like it's too, balloons up too much and it's a little too soft. So I'll show you that. I'm just going to drag that up and down just so you can see what that does. And it kind of gets like, okay, when you're dealing with some fine details like this type, it gets a little legible. But there's other values that you can change here, like soften, and again, same kind of thing. Like, do you make it like it's like really like not that much detail, and you want, it depends on what the graphic is, I think. But all these things are things you can play with. So I urge you to kind of just get in here and play around with them for a little bit, and ultimately just try to get something that you like. But you can also follow these values that I have in here, because that's that is going to get you the effect that you see here, which is pretty good. And then there's other this other drop down is techniques. So right now it's set on smooth, but there's this chisel hard version, which you can see kind of really like makes those edges a lot more like precise and like hard, rather than the kind of smooth edge in the other one. Or there's chisel soft, which is not actually in this effect. It's not a huge difference between chisel hard and chisel soft. It's a very subtle difference. But again, these are just some things you can experiment with that will change the look of your emboss deboss effect, whatever that may be. So I am going to, again, let's keep these values like pretty much where they are now. I think that's pretty good. Maybe I'll back off this shadow a little bit, and I'm going to hit OK. So now I've just adjusted that a little bit, and I have a pretty solid deboss. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to colorize that this graphic, basically this area, from the background color. So now this image, I already had it in CMYK when I opened it. If yours was in RGB, you can go ahead and convert it to CMYK now, which would be, again, up at the top, image mode, and then you would go down to CMYK. But I believe the image you're opening is also CMYK, so you probably don't have to do that. You can just double check up here that it says CMYK. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a selection of this graphic. Now, as we know, or we should know by this point, to make a selection of anything, if you hold down Command and click on that layer, again, you can see when I hold down Command, that little graphic gets added to the hand, that little marquee square. So that means that when I click on this now, it will make a selection. So you can see it's made that exact same selection of this graphic. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an adjustment layer of channel mixer, which is the black and white cookie. And we are going to, just, again, go to this little menu down here and then navigate the channel mixer, and you add that, and, you're adding that on top of this graphic layer. So that will be the top layer in the file now. And if I go to my channels, again, I can double click on each of these layers. Let me just get back out of here and go to a regular layer. But I can double click on each of these layers, and it will kind of show me, cyan, like how much cyan is in the file. So this is pretty gray, so it looks like a lot of this image is made up of cyan. And really, when I'm looking at all these, it looks like it almost has an even amount of almost all the colors. I'm just going to double click on all of them so you can see. So this is cyan, this is magenta, this is yellow, and this is black. So really, cyan, magenta, and yellow have a very similar amount of value in this, total background color that we're seeing here. And then the black has its own kind of, you can see a lot more of the lines of the definition of this leather texture that is made more of black than anything. But again, when you go back to this image, most of the background color is coming from all three of these colors. So knowing that, if I want to do like a yellow kind of, similar to this reference, if I want to have this like kind of goldeny color, well, I just know that, you know, what I need for that color is probably going to be like some yellow and some magenta, and, you know, probably not a lot of cyan, maybe a little black. So, you know, what I'll be doing first is actually just removing some cyan from my channel mixer. Now, again, because all these colors are so even, really all those sliders are going to work to effect in the channel mixer. So when I go back to my channel mix layer, and again, I'm clicking on this like info part of the layer, not on the mask, so that I am affecting the channel mixer and not the mask. And, you know, the color I want to remove is cyan, so actually that's the output channel that I'm on. And just reminding you that with channel mixer, to affect any color, you pick that color from the output channel. So if I want to add or remove cyan, I go to the cyan output channel. If I want to add or remove magenta, I go to the magenta channel. And then I use these sliders to add or remove information based on, you know, what the channels were telling me. And again, because it was so even, if I just drag the one that's at 100 down to 0, you're going to see already it, you know, it changes that color dramatically. And you can now see that there's, you know, kind of like this, you know, maroon or, you know, this brown kind of color in here. So, you know, it's already like one big step closer to getting that kind of yellowy color. So now if I want to get more to like a yellow color, I have no more cyan in here, so I probably should take out some of the red, right? So, or some of the magenta, I should say. So if I go to the output channel magenta, I'm going to start by just dragging this magenta slider down a little bit. And right there, I pretty much have the color that I'm looking for, you know, from that reference. Now, again, you can play around with this. It doesn't have to be this color. You know, if you wanted it to be more red, you can just leave that where it is. Or if you want it to be blue even, you can go back and, you know, go back to the cyan channel, add the blue back, and maybe there's other colors you want to take away from it, like the yellow. So maybe if I drag the yellow down, you can see like it's starting to get this blue. And then maybe if I go back to magenta and drag some of that out, you know, again, it's going to get this blue. So kind of, you know, be aware of, you know, how the CMYK values will affect what you're looking at. And just a little refresher, I'm going to go back and I'm going to go into Illustrator and just show you, you know, when you're dealing with like colors in Illustrator. So right now we have an RGB file. I'm just going to convert this to CMYK just so I can use these sliders, and we could talk about that really quickly. But, you know, if I have a color and, you know, I'm just going to hide the edges on this right now. But let's say I have like, you know, any of these colors in here. This is a great way to learn CMYK just in general, right? So if I have like this kind of like blue color in here, if I click on that, you know, okay, I have this blue color in here now. Now I see the CMYK breakdown of this, and, you know, it's kind of what I would expect. So a color like this, I'd say, oh, it's got a good amount of cyan and probably a little bit of magenta in there, or, you know, a decent amount of magenta. Now you can move these around and just play around and see what the color is going to look like. If I pull back on the magenta, it's going to be a light cyan color, right? If I add yellow, it's going to move towards green, or start off as like, you know, if I add a little bit of yellow, it's going to have like an aqua kind of color to it, right? If I add a lot of yellow, it's going to be green. So again, this is just like a quick cheat way to, like, you know, sample a color. Like if you have like this purple, and then see like, okay, these are the percentages of CMYK breakdown. Just playing around with this and getting comfortable with this will help you with channel mixer, because then you'll kind of like understand how to, you know, how certain colors are built, and then, you know, what you need to add or subtract, you know. So just again, a very orange color will be, you know, kind of a lot of almost 100% or 100% yellow, and, you know, a lot of magenta. Now I'm just dragging from these middle values, but, you know, I can get down to this like muddier orange, and then you can see it gets like, you know, that maybe there's some black in it and some cyan in it, and, you know, if I go to this muddier red, you know, okay, like this actually has a good amount of cyan in it, even though it has like a lot of magenta and yellow. So, you know, again, just a way to kind of like get comfortable with the CMYK spectrum. Okay, so I mean that's pretty much a quick look at using this bevel emboss tool and channel mixer, and I'm going to stop here and make a separate tutorial or tutorials using this effect on different material backgrounds. Thanks.